Hello everyone, I'm James Barnett, the creator and producer of the Night's End podcast and After the Gloaming. Thank you for being here. If you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener checking out these reimagined episodes, I hope you enjoy them. I just wanted to keep a shout out here for our patrons that joined us back when I first released these episodes. Thank you to Brian Jeans, Tristan Furr, Scott Davidson, and Debbie and Jason Gillen. These pledges have helped me to alleviate the costs it takes to get these episodes to our fans. To join the Patreon, where you can get early access to episodes, bonus Patreon-only episodes, exclusive Patreon merch, and other things, please go to patreon.com/Night's End podcast. Now, enjoy the episode. I said no thank you. We don't want your second-rate Hell Scout cookies. There are far too many toenails in them. Excuse me? It's you, friend. Quick, we have to get out of this room now, otherwise... Quick! The echo of that memory is far too strong at the moment. It needs some more time to germinate before a retelling. But I can show you what was behind that first door last time. Over here. Tag. Written by David Court and narrated by John Stinson.
It is believed one of the most common dreams is of falling. We've all been there, that helpless feeling of almost disembodied weightlessness that is all too often ended abruptly when you suddenly awake. If you're lucky, the surprise wears off in moments when it dawns on your semi-conscious brain it was only a dream, and in no time you're happily and contentedly fast asleep again. If you're one of the unlucky ones, the dream concludes with you partially reacting from the impact and you're jolted wide awake by the force of your body jerking wildly. This, you think to yourself in the following moments as you sit up in a panic, is what death might feel like. The dream was fading now, the memories of it dissipating like wisps of cloud. But the details of it cling tenaciously to the periphery of my consciousness. I was falling for what felt like an eternity and can still remember many of the sensations, falling through fresh, wintry air that suddenly became uncomfortably warm and stifling as I descended. Comforting blues to bright hues of scarlet to an all-encompassing black. I brushed the sweat off my forehead and was suddenly aware of the loudness of my own breathing, much like hyperventilation after a panic attack. I tried to relax and could feel my pulse gradually slowing from a frenzied jazz solo to a slow and steady military beat. There was no noise or activity next to me. My nocturnal actions hadn't roused my wife, which was a small mercy. There's a game I play with myself, and I refuse to believe I'm alone in this. I listened to the world outside with my eyes tight shut and try to guess what time of morning it is before I open my eyes and turn to the clock to determine how close I've been. It's a work day, and I still feel exhausted, so I hoped, please God, let it be so, it was still the very early hours of the morning, and I could rest for a little while longer. It was only now that I was more awake and extended my senses to take in the world around me. I quickly sensed something was wrong. At first, it was the complete silence that struck me as odd. The world, regardless of the time of day and where you are, unless you're some mad hippie in a sensory deprivation tank somewhere, is never completely quiet. The rustling of wind, the rhythmic ticking of clocks, the dripping of taps. I remembered reading about a laboratory in the States, an anechoic chamber, at least that's what I think it was called. That's nearly 100% sound absorbent. People simply couldn't bear to be in it for prolonged periods of time. As the occupant, you are the sound. You'd hear your heart beating, your lungs working, and your stomach rumbling. You couldn't even move around in there. We orientate ourselves through the sounds we make when we walk. Without those subtle perceptual cues, we can't maintain our balance. And that's what this was like, although I couldn't even hear my own breathing. For one terrifying moment, I was convinced I'd gone deaf. But as my hands moved to rub my eyes, I was relieved to find I could hear and feel my fingertips rubbing against skin. As sensation began to flood into my body, I was suddenly aware I wasn't lying on my bed. The surface beneath me was smooth. My hands moved down to my side, and by pressing down with my fingertips, I realized I was sitting on a perfectly flat surface. It was warm beneath my body, but as I stretched my hands out further, it became cold, like marble. If I open my eyes and look at my clock, then everything will be okay, I tried to convince myself. I was beginning to shake now because I knew exactly what was about to happen. The longer I kept my eyes tightly shut, I didn't have to face the reality. I took blessed relief in those few moments of ignorance before inevitability forced my hand, and I reluctantly opened them. I was in my bedroom and staring at my clock. It had just gone 2 a.m. I felt the warmth of my wife against me as she stirred slightly and brushed her hand against my waist. A slight breeze filtered through the curtains. That ideal scenario didn't happen, though, and my heart started to increase in pace again. Eyes open or closed, it made no difference. Blackness. Not deaf then, but blind? My heart felt like it was about to explode through my ribcage as I tried to make sense of my situation. Pull yourself together, man. You're not in your bedroom, that much is obvious. You're clearly somewhere where there is no light. How did I end up here? I cast my mind back to recall what I was doing last, where I'd been. I was in bed, of that much I was convinced. I'd woken with a start, in pain from what I suspected was indigestion. My nocturnal groaning and moaning as I clutched at myself, enough to wake my concerned wife. My chest had felt tight, as though something was crushing me. I remember her arms around me as I struggled to remain awake. Was I now in another nightmare? It felt so real. I slowly clambered up to my feet and stood there, unsteady. It was only as I put my hands down by my side I realized I was naked. I'd been wearing pajamas when I'd gone to bed. I bent down to pat the floor around myself. but there was no sign of them. Just that unending, cool, unblemished marble surface. I stumbled forwards, fingers outstretched. My steps were slow and careful as my arms groped blindly in front of me. I'd walked some 20 paces without encountering anything, the only sound coming from the sweat on the soles of my feet, causing a slight sucking sound on the ground as I walked, when I heard something else. Faint breathing. I staggered towards the source of it, and it grew slightly louder before my fingers suddenly recoiled as they encountered something. I teetered backwards from this, the briefest of touches, but I recalled the sensation. Something dry and warm. The surface cracked and contorted. Something that flinched away from me as much as I did from it. Something alive. Hello? I lurched back towards the source of the noise, more prepared now. I couldn't hear breathing this time, but could sense a presence. I felt a draft as something moved past me. It felt like whatever it was desperately trying to avoid my grasp. "Is anybody there?" I screamed. Unanswered, I was about to open my mouth to shout out again when something was pressed over it. It felt rough and desiccated, but after a few moments I realized it was a hand. A pressed palm of leathered old skin against my lips silenced me. There was something behind me. Something that leant close to my ear and whispered in an ancient voice as coarse as gravel. "Keep as quiet as you do still, or they'll find you." Before my hands could move up to free myself, I was pushed away in anger. I spun twice before I fell to my side on the ground, involuntarily crying out in pain. I heard a sharp intake of air from where I once stood, as something there held its breath. A sound that was soon drowned out by another one. A distant noise that increased in volume with every passing moment. The noise was coming from everywhere at first. I mistook it as the sound of running water, but as it drew closer, I realized the noise was footsteps. Thousands of legs tapping a staccato rhythm on the hard ground, like dominoes falling. I jumped to my feet and spun around, trying to place where they were. I flinched as something brushed against my ankle. A white-hot pain filled my senses. I was about to put my hand down to find out what had happened when something bounced off my cheek, and I was overwhelmed with agony. An attempted run ended up as nothing more than a hobble as my weight placed on my right ankle caused hurt like nothing I'd ever felt. I was aware that the air pressure around me had changed. I heard another sound over the tapping of the footsteps. A female voice. A succession of hastily barked yelps of pain, punctuated with cries of "No!" coming from some distance away. The footsteps of the invisible horde moving as one to the source of the sound. A suddenly extinguished cry became a long, drawn-out scream, which lasted for an uncomfortably long time, before ending with what sounded like a bag of water being thrown onto the hard ground. I tried not to think too hard about that noise. My hand moved to the side of my face, and in confused horror, I realized that my fingertips were pressing against my teeth. There was a huge gaping hole where the side of my mouth had been. The wound was tender, but the already scarred edges of it were hard, like thin slivers of bone, tough filaments formed from bunched skin. I was trying to remain silent, but I couldn't help but sob at the pain. Even the very act of standing was agony to me, and despite my best attempts, I could do nothing to stop myself collapsing onto the floor with a noisy thud. Pools of my own blood lining the unforgiving surface that rose to meet me. The scurrying drew closer, clearly drawn by my pained whimpering. Attempts to silence myself were futile as my breathing became louder and more panicked. Something serpentine, damp, and foul-smelling brushed against my shoulders and back. Short barbs sticking out of it curved a path across me, and I could feel the blood flowing out of me through these new conduits and down my legs. It congealed under my feet like sticky tar, the heady aroma of copper and rust causing me to gag. Another slug-like thing wrapped around my legs, or perhaps it was the same beast, mutated and bloated and of monstrous length. My senses were so overloaded I couldn't even feel the pain anymore. I was simply in too much shock, my brain teetering on the verge of madness. It was the only way to cope. I heard hysterical laughter and realized that it was the sound of my own voice, bellowing and maniacal. There was a moment when all was still, before I suddenly felt myself being lifted into the air. My feet were leaving the stickiness of the blood-coated floor, and a faint slurping sound, and I could feel the hot breath of something in front of me. The form that surrounded me constricted and adjusted, and it took my weight.
"Found you,"
it said, in a voice as ancient as terrifying, in a tone that reverberated throughout my entire soul.
"You're it,"
it hissed. Dots of venomous spittle burned to my skin. Something pressed against my lips, trying to force its way into my mouth, but my teeth were gritted tightly shut. It tapped against them twice before it released some noxious substance, and I, whimpering with fear as I felt them dissolve into blooded ivory fragments. The voice was inside my head now, as it oozed down my throat, filling me.
"Would you like to see where here is?"
it asked mockingly. It had no need to wait for an answer. I couldn't possibly give, as the space behind my eyes was filled with its light, and I found myself staring down at this place. A Stygian landscape, an atlas of horrors. My mind pleaded for the darkness again. My eyes widened, and what little atrophied vestiges of my mind still existed could do nothing but surrender before I felt my skin give way as the chittering hordes erupted like a tidal wave from inside me. I'm standing in the darkness, perfectly motionless. You get used to it after the first few dozen times. The wounds are healed as you wake in the black, scars replaced by calloused muscle and fused meat. The flesh is settled, but the memories remain raw. I know it can't be true, but I could swear after a while your eyes begin to adjust, and you can see things moving in the darkened surroundings. Silly, naive things that don't know how it works around here. They stagger around in the gloom like fools, whimpering and crying, drawing attention to themselves. The ones who'd been here the longest, we know to be incredibly quiet and still, like statues.
You've been listening to the Night's End podcast, which is a production of Dissonance Media. To support us, please leave a review, or for bonus content, head to patreon.com/Night's End podcast. Our website is nightsendpodcast.com. Tag was written by David Court. For more writing by David, go check him out at davidjcourt.co.uk. This episode was narrated by John Stinson from the Spooky Tales podcast. Check it out wherever you find your podcasts. If you have any suggestions for us here on the pod, head over to nightsendpodcast.com and drop us a line. We would love to hear from you. And as always, stay horrific, everyone.